York City Police Department has access to literally thousands and thousands of cameras across 3 boroughs that grab all sorts of footage and feed it into facial recognition software. Now, facial recognition software, of course, has many flaws because it's created by humans who tend to have various biases, whether it has to do with race, socioeconomic status. And so to know that all of this data, all of these images and all of this footage of Americans in New York is being fed into the facial recognition technology and software gives you a sense of how bad this problem really is. Now, the extent of it is worse than we had expected, but luckily Amnesty International did a study on this to give us a sense of just how widespread this practice is in the New York Police Department. Amnesty recruited thousands of volunteers to tag surveillance cameras at intersections across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx using images from Google Street View as part of a Ban the Scan campaign. They have so far identified 15,280 cameras across the 3 boroughs, with certain neighborhoods particularly heavily surveilled. Gee, I wonder which neighborhoods. Now, East New York in Brooklyn, with which the last census recorded as 54.4% Black, 30% Hispanic, and 8.4% white, was the top of Amnesty's ranking of most heavily watched neighborhoods, with 577 cameras found at street intersections across a relatively small area. So we have a dangerous and awful cocktail here, Woz, where you have terrible policing by the NYPD, which we've given so many examples of on this show throughout the years. You have the flawed facial recognition technology, and then you have insane surveillance taking place with more than 15,000 cameras catching footage of ordinary Americans as they're going through their daily lives. As a former New Yorker, what are your thoughts on this? I think you're muted, Woz.
I muted myself like a dummy. I think it's important for people to understand that East New York in Brooklyn is probably one of the last vestiges of old New York City as far as economically challenged. There is a higher crime rate than generally the rest of the city, and people are people got it tough over there. That's just the fact of the matter. And for me, the main problem is it's not that obviously there's a higher crime rate there, but there's a reason for that, right? There's less investment in things like schools and public goods and economic opportunities. Like, these are the things that cause crime. And instead of addressing those things, instead of investing in those things, in programs and such that could change the lives of these people, we turn it into a police surveillance state and treat them like they're freaking animals. It's insane, it's unfortunate, but it's hard to envision even the citizens of New York understanding that there's a better way to go about making that situation in East New York better. There's a smarter way to do that rather than turning this thing over to the damn cops who have been, their record in New York is pristine, obviously, and.
Right, but you just touched on something so important, Woz, because right now across the country, there has been a spike in violent crime. There has, and we need to be real about that, right? I don't think that's a right-wing talking point. You see it in the numbers of homicides, you see it in gun violence cases, it's all over the place. And what I'm worried about is that what you just proposed, what you just drew attention to in regard to actual investment in these communities in order to provide opportunities for people, we're just getting the right-wing side of solving it, which is more of the failed tough on crime policies that have only created an awful criminal justice system, that have only imprisoned an insane amount of non-violent Americans. I mean, it's failed policies, but at the same time, I'm not seeing a strong case being made by the left in regard to what the real solutions need to be. And if they leave this problem, if they neglect this problem, I think that we're going to revert back to the failed policies of the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah, and the bottom line, and the answer to these questions is more investment financially from the government and getting these organizations who specialize in helping people with these kinds of problems, right? Like there needs to be, it needs to be a concerted effort. This isn't just gonna disappear just because people say it is. And I remember watching you guys on Jacobin, the one episode, and the economist you guys had on was explaining the old WASP ruling class is like, those people in the tenements, they're so lazy and just liming around all day. Why don't we build them a park? Maybe they'll think to themselves they should go exercise and leave the house. It was patronizing, but they knew that at least they felt like there was some kind of investment that need to be made, amongst the poors. We gotta pay for the poors somehow. That within the capitalist class and the ruling class that we have today, that's not even a thought. It's like, you know what? Let's lock them up, throw away the key, and move on with our lives.
Yeah, and when you look at how violent crime is tackled in other countries, it is kind of amazing, because when you look at some of the Scandinavian countries that tend to have a more, I guess, humane way of dealing with crime and criminals, you notice that there's far less violent crime in those countries, far less recidivism, meaning people who do serve time behind bars are far less likely in these Scandinavian countries to end up behind bars again. Whereas in the United States, our recidivism rate is astronomical. It's super, super high, and we have obviously tough on crime policies that have failed. We have insane surveillance, which captures our every move when we're in public spaces, and obviously with technological innovation, possibly when we're in the privacy of our own home as well. And Amnesty points out that aside from violent encounters on the streets, the force also used facial recognition technology to track Black Lives Matter protesters. So this is a form of intimidation for political activists. One activist, Derek Ingram, found 50 police officers gathered outside his apartment and a police helicopter overhead after the force apparently used a picture from his Instagram page to find him. He was pursued for shouting in an officer's ear with a bullhorn. So all of that for a BLM protester, and what happened to protecting the businesses from looters? It is amazing to see what the cops are willing to go after while simultaneously complaining about how these protests lead to looting. Well, you guys have all the resources in the world. Why don't you protect the businesses that you're claiming to be concerned about, rather than cracking skulls of peaceful protesters? I don't know, just a thought. But obviously what we're doing in response to crime, what we're doing in indiscriminately surveilling Americans, what we're doing in relying in flawed facial recognition technology is only exacerbating the problems that we already have. These are not solutions. But nothing changes, and that's the frustrating thing. And I think part of the reason why nothing changes is because there's no one on the left who is proposing and fighting for, I think that second part is super relevant, fighting for alternative solutions to the problems we're experiencing.
Yeah, and the worst thing about it too, and obviously that's a problem. There's nobody on the left who is prescribing, tangible solutions to dealing with the problems of inequality and poverty that we face here in America. And specifically, I do want to talk about the NYPD, just this idea that, this unchecked, ungoverned body of our government, i.e. the New York City Police Department, who, again, let's face it, when they go into a neighborhood and they behave the way they behave, they say, well, these residents have a history of a certain behavior. Okay, cool. Let's talk about the NYPD's behavior and their history. It's riddled with corruption and crime for decades, if not centuries. That's your history, NYPD. So that being the case, what do we do with the NYPD? We say you continue to be unchecked, and 2, let's give you more resources to be more authoritarian and more ridiculous. It's like the dichotomy is just hilarious to me. If it wasn't so sad.
Right, and sick, absolutely.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.